Welcome, everybody. This is Gayla with IACP, and I'm joined today by April Metzger from Hope Haven, who is going to be presenting the third in the series of documentation supports that we're putting out there for everybody, writing a strong service plan. April is the Director of Quality Improvement at Hope Haven and also is a contractor with us and helps us with a lot of our TA things. And we've had April do presentations for us before that have been wonderful, and we know that this one is going to be exactly the same. So with that, April, thank you for doing this, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you taking time out of today to sit and listen to a presentation of how to write a service plan. I know that that's kind of a difficult thing to think about once in a while, and we know that a person's service plan is the key to driving an entire team's interactions and interventions. Today I'm hoping that I can give you some information that's going to assist you in thinking about the different layers to the service plan and have us kind of sitting back and thinking about how we're writing those so that they can best explain and guide not only the person served but also the team, because it's a tool that everybody uses. I totally understand the concept that this is a complex thing to do sometimes when we're trying to identify a human behavior, which is never easy, and then writing it down, of course, in a simple, concise, person-centered, clear way, which sounds easy, but I know in writing them myself for many years, they're not always as easy as what we want. So the service plan can be either an instrument of inspiration or a tool of torture. So I'm really hoping that today I'm more inspiring than torturing you as we go through some of this, and that it gives you some guidance in being able to produce a good document that we can use. So, oops, sorry. So when we talk about a service plan, the reason that it's important is because it gives a clear direction to the people that we serve. It documents their voice in that process of what do they want, what are their desires in their service planning process. It also gives us direction for the team to know what we're supposed to do and the direct line staff that are utilizing it. And it gives the structure to the documentation. I've found that when we don't have a good, strong service plan that's clear and concise, it's hard for the direct line staff to know how to document their daily notes. So this is kind of the first piece in building a good, strong foundation is important to building a good house, and this is truly the foundation for that documentation and planning as we go. It also is the thing that allows us to measure and track, identifies what those things need to be, and a way for the team to work on identified needs that they have as well as the client wants to work on. So there's different elements to this when we're talking about the service plan. And in this, I'm not including, I know there's a lot of other supplemental information that goes into a service, into the actual service plan that we print out. So this training is really focused on the meat of it, the goals, the objectives, the barriers, the objectives, and the interventions. It's not going to outline all the other elements that we need to have in there. So it's just kind of a focused training on that piece of the service plan. So the first element is the goal, and that is obviously the big picture. That's where we want to get on, that's like the 2-mile long run where we're trying to get to. It's not something we're going to accomplish immediately, but it's the big picture. So those are generally somewhat easier to write because they don't have to be so particular and so measurable, and they can really be very person-centered at that point in terms of things like I want to improve my overall health, or I want to have more friends, or I want to be able to manage my own money so I can become my own payee. It doesn't have to be written exactly like these examples, but it is that bigger, broader perspective of things. After we write the goal, then we need to identify the barriers or the reasons why somebody needs support in this. And when we've had reviews from different MCOs coming in, this has been something that they've talked to us about in regards to this barrier piece being the explanation as to why we need to be there. What's going on with this person, or what has gone on with this person in their lifetime that has us needing to provide that support to reach that goal. And this is especially true for habilitation services when we're doing those kinds of things. that we include the mental health issues that are going on in that. So as my example here states, Sally has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. The symptoms she experiences are poor concentration and manic episodes that impair her ability to handle money or make safe choices, such as who to trust. When depressed, she isolates, has poor eating habits, and has attempted suicide twice via med overdosing. So it's kind of a little bit of their history. You know, you're going to obviously change that and adjust that according to the specific goal that you've identified, like what's going on with them. And it also can include other things too. I mean, we have a lot of individuals that we serve who have a dual diagnosis with intellectual disability, so you can definitely mention that as well in that. But as we know, HAB services are designed to work on the mental health side of things and what's impairing that. But it's okay to include those different elements in there as well. It doesn't have to be a book. It just has to be a concise description of what experiences or symptoms the person is having that's impairing them from achieving that goal independently. So those are kind of the first two easy parts, I would say, or easier parts of the service planning process. When we get into the objective, that's where things start to get a little more difficult, when we're trying to write these measurable and clear. And it really is the heart of the plan. It's what's driving the whole thing, because that's, as I said, the goal is the long-term perspective. The objective is kind of the here and now. What are we working on right now to make that baby step along the way? These are very critical that they're written in a way that's understandable, written in a way that drives staff and are clear to the direct line staff when they're documenting what needs to be there and how they need to do that, as well as clear to the person served on what they're supposed to be achieving. So some of the pieces, of course, to this, that they need to be measurable, that we know that, that's pretty clear. We've identified that over years of these kinds of trainings. It needs to be individualized and based on the person's needs and skills. So what we've identified through either assessments, through the person's own expressed desires, through the team's input. You know, you're having your SIS when you're looking at ID people, and you're using different elements, social histories and interarray and all those things that we're using to identify what needs to be worked on. They also need to be SMART. That's not a new terminology for most of you, I'm sure, where that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So when we're writing a good objective, the structure of that is kind of where it gets a little more complicated and where we really want to spend our time and our energy focusing on that. So it should be a single sentence that composes of these 5 different elements, where you have conditions, either one or more of those. Obviously, it identifies the person. It identifies the behavior, the performance criteria or criterias. There can be more than one of those as well to make it clear. And then also be identified as a timeline. So we're going to take a few minutes to go through each one of these things, because I think it's important that we kind of focus on these to understand what those really mean. So the first thing is the condition. It's entered in as necessary to make the objective clear. Now, with these different elements, these 5 different elements, there's not like you have to have the condition first and then you have to have that. They can be in different places in that sentence structure that you are, but we're just going to kind of go through these in order, but they can be moved around in the sentence. So we're going to identify what type of assistance or prompts will be used. So in this, it's making it clear what needs to happen for this thing, or when does this need to happen. So when asked by Jeff, so asked by staff, Jeff is the what, or when given 2 verbal reminders, or when given the instruction. So those are like what's going on at that point in time that has us, that we know we're working on this particular objective. And then it might be identified when at bedtime, or when in the van, or during day hab, or before showering. You know, those kind of things may be needed or not needed in that sentence. This is probably the easiest part of the whole objective, right, is the person. So you're either going to use the person's name or I, because it's they own this objective. It should be their plan. It should be something we're encouraging them to really be invested in, and if it's coming from them, that should be where that investment is. But one of the things we want to make sure we're not doing is writing a staff objective. And I've seen these things, and nobody does this intentionally, so this is where we need to really write out our objectives and then stop for a minute, reread them, have somebody else read them, or think about them, and think about what is this objective really telling me. So for example, in the first one, it's more of a staff objective. After working out, staff will assist Sally in her daily routine of showering. So when you're putting that staff will assist, I mean, not that that can't be in an element, but when you're putting it in that perspective or in that language, it's looking like staff are responsible for Sally's being successful at something, and you really want Sally to own her objective. And of course, I'm using Sally in this, but we would use I in our statement. But so it's better if you could make sure you're writing a client objective or a person's objective. After working out, I will take a shower without reminders from staff. So, or with reminders from staff maybe in there too. But what we want to do is make sure that we're writing the sentence structure in a way where it's not dependent upon necessarily staff doing something for that to be successful. We want the person to be doing something and initiating something so that they can be successful at that. The third part of this objective is the behavior. And this is something that I want people to really pay attention to when they're writing objectives and be looking at your objectives, because we kind of get used to writing things in a similar way, and we may get into a pattern, but this is something that I think people miss sometimes. So it's important that we really focus on this part of that. So we want to identify it as an observable, overt behavior. Usually it's some kind of an action verb. Like, it's not clear to say that you're going to behave, or Mary will learn, or Kelly will participate, or Kim will understand how to do something, because you can't see that. I can't see what does behave mean, or I can't see learn. I can't see that. I don't know what that is. And it's not clear. So it'd be better to say things like, Sam will use non-vulgar language. You might put some parentheses on that explanation what that is, or Mary will demonstrate, she will make, she'll write out. So when we think about learning as unclear, what are you going to see them do that's going to show that they have learned something? So much like a teacher in a classroom where, you know, they're teaching something, but they give a person a test, or they have them build something, or they have them make something, they have them do something to demonstrate that they actually attained that skill. Because I can't just look at a person and say, you've learned something just by me telling you something. We have to be able to see what that looks like. So think about that in terms of what's observable, what's very clear and apparent. This next slide kind of gives some examples of things that we really don't want to use that are more covert in regards to, you know, the words like think, feel, understand, be able, know or learn, like, appreciate, try to. And this is by no means at all a comprehensive list. This is just to kind of get you thinking and to start your brain in engaging this concept. It's better to say things like draw, name, list, paraphrase, write out or recite something, describe something, repeat something, identify something, because those are things that somebody's doing, those are action verbs, those are ways for people to actually see that something was attained. The other thing that happens sometimes when I'm looking through objectives and looking through service planning is that we have these very nice, because I understand that we don't want a service plan that's 42 pages long. We have to be able to write things concisely. We want to be able to make sure that staff understand what's going on, that we're writing them in a way where all the services that we're providing can be documented against. And that gets complicated, and that gets hard. So part of this training is just to kind of get you thinking about how we can do this. It's not something that I have a magic wand that you can just wave to make everything perfect, but you want to be thinking about not compounding things like this slide talks about to the point where we really don't know if somebody can be successful or not, because part of my job is training DSPs, direct sports professionals as well, on how to document and how to train, and they'll give me feedback and be like, well, I don't know how to document progress on this. And when I look back at the objectives, I can understand how that's complex, because if you write something where you have multiple objectives in a place, for example, like Kelly will complete her laundry and take her medications daily, or Kelly will ask for medications at administration time and take her medications successfully 3 or 4 days a week. So the questions that I have below this kind of trigger our mind to be thinking, if she does her laundry but doesn't take her meds, did she make progress or not? Because one of the things that's really come across in our last audit was that progress by the staff has to be documented, has to be clear. It can't just be like, yes, they made progress on something. It has to be clear on what kind of progress they made towards the objective. So if we're writing an objective where we can't really say, okay, so she did her laundry but she didn't take her meds, I don't know how to document that. Was progress made or not? It's not clear. Or in the second example, if she doesn't ask for meds but then takes meds when reminded, is she successful? So you have to really think about how you're writing things down and thinking of not only about, does this sound clear to me, but if I had to document on this later, would I be able to clearly say that this person met this objective or worked on this objective or made progress on this objective today in a clear and concise way? So obviously, like in the first example, or in these examples, you'd have to split these objectives apart. And maybe what we have to do so that we don't have, huge long objectives is work on something for a period of time and then add another one 6 months later, or decide as a team, like, we're going to really focus on this for the next year, and then we're going to add these things later. So you kind of got to play that game and talk that through with the team on how you're going to focus on these things so that somebody doesn't have so many objectives in their plan that they don't even know what they're doing. So behaviors identify what specific action or skill needs to be changed, added, or modified. So when you're talking about this, I will review her coping plan daily to reduce her anxiety. That's not very clear, because is that a real behavior? Is that, why do I want them to use that coping plan? Is that achieving the behavior? So when I'm trying to explain in this is that, what are you trying to achieve? Ask yourself that. Is the plan that you really just want to review a coping plan? I mean, I can review a coping plan all day long. If I don't implement it and I don't activate on it, if I don't take action on it, it's really not doing me any good. So what kind of overt behavior are we trying to see happening based upon some intervention or some step? Like reviewing a coping plan may be an intervention that we're going to do, but it's not necessarily something that we want her to achieve in terms of that behavior. It's something we want them to do to achieve something else. What does that look like? What is that something else? So if it's to reduce anxiety, what behavior are we seeing when the anxiety flares up? That's the thing that we're trying to really get reduced. So if you might have objectives that talk about just attending something or showing up at something or doing something, is that, you have to ask yourself and think about, is that what I want to have, them just showing up or them just attending? Probably not. It's probably something about you want them to attend because you want this other behavior, this other thing to start or happen. That's what you want to capture in your objective. So be reviewing your things and thinking about that. What do I really tangibly, what can I see, what can I have this person experience that we want to change? And that's what we need to do that. So the fourth thing talks about performance. So that's the degree to which the person will perform the task or skills successfully. So what do they have to do? This is like the person's, their action. How often do they have to do that? What do they have to do? Again, it should be easily witnessed or easily determined. You might ask things like how many of something, how well, how fast, how often, and they can be used across the board. You may have more than one performance thing identified. So an example, I'll use non-vulgar language in my interactions during group, 20 to 25 groups a month for at least 3 of the next 6 months. So that 20 to 25 groups for at least 3 of the next 6 months, that's identifying the different performance, how often and how long, and that kind of thing. At least 3 times a month for 8 of the next 12 months, I'll review my mental health coping plan to ensure it's current and accurate. I'll wash and dry all my dirty clothes once a week for at least 30 of the next 52 weeks. So some of the things that you have to think about when you're talking about performance things are that we're not leaving out a piece of it. Sometimes I'll see things like they'll do this, somebody might say once a day they'll do whatever this thing is. well, have we identified within that how often they need to, I mean, what's the percentage? So if we set somebody up to say how often they'll do something, or they'll do it daily, and they miss it once, I mean, they've obviously can't meet that objective. So we set them up for failure immediately, because we don't have any parameters of success. And, you know, if I, for example, have to take medication every day, there might be a day that I miss it. That doesn't mean that I'm, you know, we don't want to set people up to like, well, I can't meet my objective anyway, so I'm just going to stop doing it. We want to make sure we give them hope and we give them encouragement, and that there might be percentages, or there might be so many times out of a group. When you're using percentages to measure things, make sure that you have enough opportunities where that percentage is adequate. If somebody only has, you know, an opportunity to do something 3 times, and you know, you want them to meet that at 80% effectiveness or something, you're making it sometimes where it's impossible for them to be able to achieve something. So make sure you're careful with percentages. I'm not saying you can't use them. I'm just saying make sure that you understand how that count breaks down to that person can actually achieve those percentages, and if that works or not in how you've written things down. And then you also don't set people up to where a one and done situation, or if you're setting something up for a period of, say, 6 months, and you're looking at something and you say, you know, the person's going to do this 6 times in the next 6 months. Well, if they do it 6 times in the first week, you've met it, you've accomplished it, you should be writing another objective. So being careful on how, yeah.
We have a question here that I think, as you're explaining this, would be great to clarify. Is this being written to be done with staff assistance or independently? That isn't clear in the objective. How do you incorporate that?
Sure. So, well, one of the things that you can understand is sometimes you do have to put, if there's parameters with staff in there that you want to be able to have them do. On the other hand, it's sort of an assumption that staff are going to, if staff have to assist in a specific way, you may want to put that in the objective. The other thing is why would you have an objective if staff aren't going to assist in doing it? Then the person can do it independently. So you have to kind of think about that. I mean, are we putting that language in there just because, or because that's how we kind of used to writing them, or is it really necessary for this person to achieve it? So sometimes it is, where staff have to administer or do different things with it. So it kind of depends on the parameters and the expectations that have to go into it.
Thank you. I think that's a great clarification.
Yeah, if they need to clarify that again, they can ask again. I'll certainly try and approach that again. So,
okay.
So along with the performance, do we have everything that we need? Sally or I is the person, a wash and dry, observable behavior, all my dirty clothes, once a week, it's a condition for at least 30 of the next 52 weeks, performance criteria. So we've got our different elements in this. But something to think about, you know, all the pieces are present, all these things that we've talked about are there. But what if Sally waited until Sunday at 11 o'clock to start her laundry? Is she successful? What if Sally started her laundry at 8 a.m. and left her clothes in the washer for 2 days before she dried them? Is she meeting this objective? So some of objective writing, a lot of objective writing, is knowing the person that you're interacting with. Because if you don't know the person, you're not going to know what they already achieve and what they can achieve. So some things can be understood, where if you, like, this may be perfectly fine if you know that Sally kind of does this stuff and she does it routinely and that kind of stuff. But if you know a person, if the issue really is that they put their laundry in on Monday and they don't get it out until Friday, you know, that's what you're working on, you may have to put some additional parameters in there. So you have to identify what those things are and know that person, getting feedback from staff, getting feedback from the team in regards to what am I trying to accomplish. And if those specific things need to be in the objective, then we want to make sure and include those. Like, I'll wash and dry all my dirty clothes once a week, completing the task 1 day prior to 7 p.m. for at least 30 of the next 52 weeks. So I'm not saying that that specificity has to be in every single objective, but if you have to know what that person is trying to accomplish and what their behavioral patterns are, and then you might have to put those parameters, those additional performance parameters in there so that you really know what you're addressing. Because otherwise, if if the staff did that, or the client did that, where they put it in on Monday, didn't get it out till Wednesday night, technically they're doing their laundry once a week. You know, but the staff in the meantime are like, how do I document on this? I don't know if they made their objective or not. I mean, it's still sitting in the dryer and they won't take it out. You know, so making sure that we're giving those parameters as necessary for the person that we're serving. Is there another question? No.
Yeah, just more along that line about the staff assistants, et cetera, just to kind of expand on this. There's a question here of how would other agencies bill for the services they provide? Usually that's why they have it worded that way, with staff will assist, so they can bill for providing that. Is that a good explanation as to why you're adding the staff assistance piece in it? It's not really about taking away their independence and celebrating that person's independence. It's about supporting them and what your role is as a provider.
Yeah, those things are sometimes going to be included in the teaching procedures, or what we call interventions. You know, so I mean, those kinds of things line up with that staff will do. You know, this, and this to support this person on this objective. So I don't think you're going to get. It's not like you're not going to get paid if you don't have in there with that they need staff assistance in there. If it fits into the objective, I'm not saying you can't say that. But I'm just saying, when I talked about that staff in the not making it a staff objective, making sure that you're wording that in a way that the client, that you're sure the responsibility falls on the client, their piece of that. But staff, that may be a condition that staff are supporting them in a certain way. Like they can't do it 100% independently, so you have that condition of the staff in there. But it doesn't always have to be with staff assistance. You know, blah, 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 because the person you can write that objective out, and then in the interventions or in the teaching procedures, you're identifying how staff are assisting them in that. That's how you're justifying your being there, which ties back to the barriers as to what's going on that they can't accomplish that. So it's all sort of a linking sort of process.
April, just another question as we go on, and I think that this is one of those logistics things. Are you concerned, or how do you manage the fact that the current AmeriGroup and UHC person-centered documents don't allow for, there's a limit on how many words you can get in there? They're kind of constrictive.
Is that a question from an IHH case manager or somebody? I mean, because
yes.
Okay, that helps clarify it, because they're trying to put it into their forms.
Right.
And having problems fitting all of that language into the form.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have a real good answer for that, other than going back to the providers and saying we need a form with more words in it, or with more space in them. And some of this could be in the case manager's plan. You know, it can be broader perhaps, but in the actual agency's plan, the provider's plan, you have that flexibility more, I would imagine, that you're not limited to your space. So
okay.
So they might be able to paraphrase it differently in the case management plan, and then expand upon it in the provider's plan.
Yep, perfect. You just answered another question there. And just to clarify too, we're talking about this training is really focused on what's required in Iowa Code, with an MCO bent to it, of what you know, what you've experienced with MCOs and accrediting bodies like CARF, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great questions, folks.
And I realize that, you know, I've written service plans for 20 years, or looked at them, and I'll still write one and be like, oh, this is really good. And then I'll look at it later and be like, oh, missed this piece, or that wasn't there, or that wasn't clear enough. Or when I go back, what I often tell when I'm training our individuals who write service plans for our agency, you know, is write one and then, walk away and come back to it in a little bit and look at it again and think about not only what does this look like right now, but if I need to pull data from this in 6 months or 3 months or whatever, have I written in a way that staff are going to be able to give me the outcomes that the data that I need to be able to say if this person has met this or not? And am I not writing this in a way that's short term, so that it's shutting down right away if somebody meets it or accomplishes it really quickly? Or am I writing this in a way that for the person, it's a one and done, or it's 100% efficient, like they have to be 100%, or they don't meet it, or it's a one and done kind of objective that I've written. So sometimes just thinking about that, like later when I want to come back on this and document, how do I want staff to be able to provide me that data? Do I have that written down in a clear way that they can say at the end of their shift or at the end of their documentation time to be able to say, yes, this person made progress on this, or no, they didn't make progress on this because of whatever's going on, because this didn't happen, or this did. So sometimes taking it from the case manager level or whatever and thinking about it in terms of the DSP level staff can help you get out of one mindset and into another to think about, if I had to document on this daily, do I have that clear for them to be able to know how to document that progress? And for the person to be able to say, I'm giving you this range of flexibility that we know kind of where you're at on this, and we can work on this over a period of time. There's a lot of little moving pieces in this, so I understand it's complex. So as we go into the performance, you also want, is the skill type identified? So this is kind of this slide particularly relates to what we've been given feedback from particularly from UHC, which I know may or may not be necessary down the road, but I think it's a good thing to do because one of the things that they want to see is that we've documented in our service plans, and I'm talking about the provider level here, that that we are documenting against the state requirements in terms of what services are. So what you can do for HAB or what you can do for waiver services. And so there's particular, there's scopes of service that are on there in regards to what we can do, and they're identified. So my suggestion, you don't have to do this. This is just something that I'm trying to transition in our agency, that this is clearly identified in the objective level. And I realize that most of the people we serve aren't going to care a hill of beans about, what that is. But for us and for our staff to give them that direction and guidance when they're reading that to document, this is one of the things that I'm suggesting to do. So for example, you might say, to improve on my adaptive living skill, that's one of the things in the scopes of service of doing laundry, I'll wash and dry all my dirty clothes, blah, blah, blah. So we're identifying that kind of as a preface. I'll work on my community integration skills, because each skill that we have identified in our objective should relate back to something that we can actually do according to rule. Take that from what you want out of this. This is something that we're trying to transition, because one of the things that we were told is that they want to see in our documentation the particular identified scope of service skill that you can do, and this is one way that I'm suggesting we can show that really clearly, is that it's in the objective. So staff don't have to, the DSP level staff don't have to go and think about that all the time. It's right there in the objective. They can reference that, or they don't even have to necessarily reference it because it's referenced in the objective. So speaking about those things, this next slide kind of shows you the different elements that you can do according to rule in these different services. And obviously I know there's work, serve, pre-voc, and all those other things that I don't have identified in this. So this is just kind of the top 3 that we're doing. There's other ones that you can look up, but these are the things that we might be able to incorporate into those objectives, this kind of terminology or some version of it, so that it's clear. So when you're done writing your objective, this might be helpful to ask yourself, are the conditions clear so everyone knows how or when this is to be run? Are we clear on that? Is the behavior something I can see? It's not something that, I think I can see, like really, can I see it? Is the skill really the behavior I want to see changed? Is it written for the client, not for the staff? Is it specific to one skill and not compounded into a bunch of other things, so I don't know when I'm making progress on something, when I'm not making progress on something else? Do I have enough performance criteria so that it's not a one-and-done type objective? And is it positive and strength-based? So a lot of times, sometimes you can't do this way, but most of the time we want to have these written in a way where you're telling somebody what they should do, not what they shouldn't do. So having objectives like the person will not do this or the person will not do that, or versus trying to reframe those in a way to explaining what we want them to do versus not want them to do. Okay, so that's kind of the meat of the objective. The other thing that's in there is that there's a timeline identified in your objective or in your plan, and that needs to be the date by which the performance criteria should be achieved, includes a month, day, year. Sometimes we don't need this specifically in the sentence. I know in our plans that we write as our provider agency, it's like a start date and a target date, end dates are identified like below that. So sometimes you might need to specify it like so much time in the next 6 months or something, but you still have your start and end dates identified someplace. If it's not outside of the objective specifically, you do want to include it in the sentence structure of that objective. All right, so when you're done with that piece of it, then you have your interventions or your teaching procedures. These are the things that indicate how we're going to teach that skill. So this is the core to your DSPs or whatever level staff are working one-on-one with this person on what they need to be doing in order to accomplish that objective. So this is your explanation of services that's going to justify what you need to do to help this person. You need to ask yourself, do they include the best way to teach based on the person? So are we including, you know, the different elements of that, either verbal, hand over hand, visual, whatever? I mean, we're explaining that if necessary for the person. So examples of this might be, you know, staff will assist Sally with setting an alarm on her watch to remind her of her med pass times, or staff will provide a verbal reminder to Sally to take meds at her prescribed time. If she doesn't, allow this, or staff will review the medications prior to each med pass. Staff will give constructive feedback to Sally and her ability to recall her meds. And obviously this is just a medication example. There's going to be lots of different things for depending on the objective. But this is where you're identified staff will, or staff will provide assistance, or staff will give so many cues, or whatever that may be. This is your directions to your staff. So kind of pulling this stuff together and looking at this stuff in frames, because the examples I gave were just snippets of examples when it really does have to be an all-encompassing package where we're looking at the assessments, and then we're putting these things all together, and they rely on each other, and hopefully in your documentation all these elements are showing up so that when you're doing your note they correlate to this and it's all sort of one little bundle. So if we had the goal of I want to be able to take my medications without assistance, barriers, client has ADHD and mild ID as a result, functional limitations associated with med management, is unable to identify what his meds are, why he's taking them, and how often he takes them. He requires staff assistance to learn this information. Without assistance, he's at risk of medical attention due to the inability to take medications correctly. The objective is to work on the skill of medication management during each, that's where I've got identified the scope of service. During each scheduled medication administration, I will name every medication I'm taking without assistance for 10 consecutive scheduled medication administration times. So looking at that, then you have your start and your end times to figure out your timelines. Like I said, you can adjust those how you need to according to your agency. But looking at these things and that, and then staff will ask Sam to name each of his meds. For any medication, Sam can identify, staff will provide the name and reason for taking them, and then ask Sam to repeat that. Staff will note progress in the service documentation. You don't necessarily have to write that in every one, but looking at this, how this all fits together into a package of what's my goal, what's going on with the client that has that limited, that they can't do that independently, what actual thing am I looking at that's measurable and overt, and then what are the staff doing to support that person in that. Just another example, I want to live in my own apartment, it's a goal. Due to Mickey's mental health diagnosis of schizophrenia, he struggles completing daily and adaptive living skills. He shows extreme anxiety and difficulty with comprehension, due in part to the active auditory hallucinations he experiences. Mickey needs staff to instruct him step by step with things like stirring, making a sandwich, getting dressed, completing hygiene, as well as most activities of daily living. So to improve my adaptive living skill, I will make and pack into my lunchbox a sandwich, a fruit, a vegetable, a drink, and at least one other item of my choosing, daily 4 to 5 days a week for at least 19 of 26 weeks from this day to this day. That would be another way where you can write it in there without the timeline, without having it outside of it. So in this example, when I looked at this first, sometimes it will say things like, I will make and pack my lunch daily 4 to 5 days a week. So this is one of those where maybe that person understands what a lunch is and does a good job at putting the regular things in there, just can't remember to do the lunch. So, but somebody else, for example, may think lunch is a bag of Doritos and 4 cookies. And if we're trying to really help them understand what that is, you might have to put that additional condition in there about where they're putting it and also what's going in there to give them that instruction and to teach that skill of what particular things does a lunch make. And obviously that can be discussed with the person if they don't like sandwiches or whatever the case may be. But this might be we have to put a specific criteria or condition in there that allows you to understand what that is based upon the knowledge of the person that you're serving.
April, this might be a good place to interrupt and just kind of have you explain. I've had a couple of people write in and say that they've never included the barriers within the actual body of the goal, but they're listed elsewhere in the service plan. Are you saying that barriers need to be included in the actual goal section?
That was something that the MCO wanted to see in relation to how those tie back to the goal specifically. So, and that's how our system is set up, where we have those different these 4 different levels in our system to be able to include that. So if you're not including that underneath there, I would think that you'd have to be pretty clear elsewhere in your intervention what goals those barriers are tying to.
Yeah, and to take that a little bit further, this what you're talking about is how to make really good documentation flow. And if I heard what you said earlier, if you have the barriers listed, it makes it easier for the staff to talk about what did they improve, what were they trying to do this for, why was that necessary? Is that correct?
Yeah, and it also helps identify very clearly for the staff if they can see all of these pieces when they're documenting. It gives them a good reference as to what kind of symptoms a person is experiencing, what's a little bit of their history in regards to what they're looking for, and it also it's a package deal, so it flows together. So when an auditor comes in to look at your documentation that falls below the intervention, then it easily can see, oh, this documentation is there, this is what staff are doing because this is what you said they were supposed to do, because this is their objective, because this is what's going on in their life that's a barrier to this, to achieve this goal. So it all sort of flows like a tree or flows together in, downriver, so to speak, so that it all ties together.
Thank you.
If you have your barriers outside of your goals and objectives and interventions, I'd say make sure that you're really clear on how that's limiting the particular goals that you've identified you're working on.
Perfect. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So just the third example, the goal, I want to manage my mental health symptoms so I can remain living in my own apartment. Due to JoJo's mental health diagnosis of major depression, he struggles completing daily adaptive skills. He experiences difficulty with comprehension, and so forth in regards to the barriers that we're looking at. The objective, I will work on my adaptive living skill of hygiene by showering at least 3 days between Monday through Sunday for 15 to 26 weeks from that date to that date. So we're putting in there the things that we're understanding, giving them the parameters of what's a week, perhaps that might need to be needed, so that people understand when they're documenting how they're doing that. Staff will monitor the number of days that JoJo showers during their drop-in support. Staff will ensure that JoJo marks his shower days on his tracking calendar and reviews the days that are left in the week to be successful. Staff will do a mental health wellness check-in to review if his symptoms are barriers to this success and provide a review of or suggestion for coping tools he can use to improve his recovery. If JoJo is not showered for more than 2 days, staff will encourage him to take a shower while staff are present. If JoJo complies following the shower, staff will ask JoJo the impact of this action is taken on his overall feelings of wellness and discuss this in terms of how personal care can aid in feeling better. So sometimes the interventions, I guess, from my perspective, it's helpful to put in there things that you want the staff to do in terms of follow-up, because most of our direct line staff are not trained mental health professionals, and they're getting training when they're coming in. But if we're encouraging and writing in the interventions what we want them to do in terms of how to follow up, how to have those conversations, especially with the individuals that we're serving who are on HAB services where mental health is an issue, but also other people, just that conversation about, okay, you did this thing, how does that make you feel? And trying to encourage that pattern of repetition and to have a person clearly see, like, this action resulted in this outcome, and make them aware of that. Because if you're not aware of it, you don't put together that A, B, and C help me achieve D. And so part of our job as staff is to lay that out for a person and to make that connection for them so that they'll repeat those behaviors. So outlining that in the interventions for staff can be helpful in regards to giving them direction as to what they do. It's not just showing up and checking if they've taken their shower or not. Like, there's more to their service delivery than that. And interventions can be a place that we can put that in there to help them. But again, we don't need, books upon books upon books of, we don't need a 100-page service plan. So writing that in a way that's concise is important. So my takeaways from this, hopefully that you can walk away from, is that your goals obviously are your long-term focus, don't necessarily have to be measurable. Your barriers, identify the reasons the goals, objectives are necessary, why are services needed. The objectives need to be smart. They need to include a condition, the person, the behavior, the performance criteria, and the timeline. Overt, not compounded, may need to use more than one performance criteria in behavior to have a clear outcome that's there. And then list the what-tos for staff and give them instructions is what the interventions or the teaching procedures are in terms of how to support the person and document progress. So other questions that I haven't answered along the way, Gayla?
Jan mentions that the barriers are already part of the case manager's plan from which the goals are developed. So I think that making sure, maybe you want to address how you make sure that those things sync up, and if it's necessary to repeat those. What I'm getting is that there are agencies that have different sorts of documentation systems, and some seem to allow for the barriers to be listed elsewhere. And just really, I think it's just more of a logistics thing that maybe you could speak to, that it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly as you said, but just how you get them all pulled together. So if you want to speak to that again and how you work with the case managers.
Yeah, so in our agency, obviously, you have the case manager's plan, which looks different than the provider's plan. And my understanding has always been that you can kind of take the case manager's plan and you need to follow it, but you can expand on it and enhance it if necessary to meet the specificity of what you're doing as a provider. And I understand that different systems have, because electronic systems, they all are a little bit different. It's important that when an auditor comes in to review you, hold on a second, we had vacuuming start right outside of my office. I apologize if the sound is there. We're getting it shut off. So if you can't get it I'm giving you the format that our system uses. And I do think it's important that barriers are identified clearly in the plan that you have as a provider. If they're not exactly right after the goal, then wherever they are in the plan, you need to make sure that they're comprehensive enough to explain why services are necessary, and that staff have to have access to those, and that when an auditor looks at your documentation, that's clear throughout the documentation process.
That's great. Thank you. Are there any other questions? If there are, you could certainly type them into the question box. And I wanted to point out, a lot of you have asked if you can have access to this slide deck. And it is posted in the handout section, which should be down below in your GoToWebinar registration piece. And we'll also have it on the TA webpage for you. It'll take a few days or so to get that up there, but it will be available, as will all of the things that we're presenting around how to develop a good documentation system. There'll be a whole comprehensive package of that available for you to download and to access on our website. We have a note here that the reference link on the last slide seems to be not working, so perhaps we can get that corrected. Thanks for that.
Yes.
Well, April, I thought that this was wonderful. I've gotten a lot of positive comments coming in, and of what a valuable resource this is. And we understand that we didn't go over everything that's included in a service plan. You were just focusing on those things that really help relate to doing quality documentation. But we acknowledge that there are other pieces to service planning, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, you have your demographics and you have your a whole bunch of different stuff. I mean, our service plans contain a lot of information about any referrals you're making or rights restrictions. Those kinds of things are all a piece of our service plan. This was just primarily designed to focus on the goals and objectives and intervention section of that service plan. So,
yep. And Rebecca, thank you for your question, because she asked, could you provide a sample of what the DSP documentation will look like? And that is going to be included in subsequent presentations that we're doing. If you're joining us for our technical assistance on the road training, that's going to be starting next Monday in Independence, then Iowa City, Des Moines, Storm Lake, we will be talking about how you coach DSPs to do good documentation. That's a portion of our presentation that will also ultimately be recorded and accessible to you. And then in June, April is going to be doing a session that is specific for your DSPs to view. So it will directly talk about what kind of documentation, what the components of the documentation need to look like. So that's perfect timing on that question. And there was a suggestion too, as we develop this, to maybe include a couple of examples for supported employment. And I think we can probably make that happen too. Great suggestions.
yeah, and I realize that wasn't in this. However, the same principles apply across the board in those, in terms of the conditions and all of that kind of reference. But yes, examples for that's a good suggestion.
Great. Well, what I'm seeing here, yes, all the presentations that we're doing around documentation will be recorded and accessible to people through our website when they're all done. There'll be 5 pieces to it. We had the first one, which was the interarray, basically using standardized assessments to inform service planning so that we make sure that we're focused in on what those barriers and things are. So we had the interarray and the CIS. What April has just done is about how we develop objectives, teaching skills, interventions, et cetera, that are measurable, that are smart. And then we'll have coaching for how we get people to work with us successfully, and then one that is specifically for DSPs, but it'll all be recorded and available to you. well, I'm not seeing any other questions come in except thank yous. So with that, I want to thank you again, April. As always, excellent information and a really valuable resource. So we just have nothing but thanks to share with you. So with that, we're going to close this out and wish everybody a happy Thursday. Bye all.